Pump up the baseline.
Beatrix is extremely popular among Smurfs and players who know how to pilot this extremely difficult to play marksman. In fact, she was the character I used to get to solo queue to the highest rank years ago when Mythic Glory was still a point system. But let's not waste any time, let's take a look at Beatrix, the next hero in our How to Counter series, which teaches you exactly how to handle this hero and come out on top. Part 1. Marksman matchups. Let's be honest, if you're picking marksman, you're probably first locking the MM. This means you probably don't have time and opportunity to counter pick into the draft. So let's first talk about if you have no choice but to play whatever marksman that you have. Let's get into general tips in the marksman lane. What makes Beatrix so strong in lane is her flexibility in choosing 4 different weapons depending on the lane situation, which makes her really popular for very high MMR players or even Smurfs in general, because you can pretty much like solo carry most of the lane, especially if the people don't know how to counter. But that's what this video is for. Basically, Beatrix can remove or create side lane pressure extremely quickly with her cannon weapon Bennett, freeing up her to either farm the side crabs to get an even more huge goal advantage, or even rotate to the mid and add pressure there and maybe get a couple of 2 kills. If you double down, let's say you call your support to help you out and 2v1 her in lane, she can easily just switch to Renner, her sniper rifle, and play very safely under the tower, which means the opportunities to kill a good Beatrix player is actually much less and less than, for example, other marksmen out there because of her flexibility. The honest and best way. The best way to handle Beatrix early on, regardless of what marksman you play, is to try to get favorable traits on the Beatrix as quickly as possible. For example, just poking, trading blows with her to keep her health modest. This way, if she has very low health, 50% around, she'll feel much less confident to rotate around the map and walk around and just like boss people around in the early game. At the same time, you need to remember that lane management is very important, as Beatrix has a lot of lane clear early on and is very happy to move around the map and add pressure and gank very early on, even as a marksman. Especially since her cannon Bennett slows enemies as well, which adds a lot of utility in early game team fights where mobility is still very low in general. Now, if your teams are Angels and they let you last pick any marksman to play to counter Beatrix, first you have to thank them for being so generous. Normally marksmen don't go last. But the best options in this case when you are choosing is good characters that basically have hard stun or great wave clear or even kill trap or poke, which means damaging the enemies like gradually. Some marksmen, for example, is like Broody, which is very excellent. Popo and Kopa, also another great marksman. Clint and Irithel all offer very good aggression on the Beatrix early on and is considered a generally favorable lane. Otherwise, you are at least removing a lot of the threats that Beatrix provides. Which brings us then to part 2. Now that we've talked about our key counters, what is the key weakness of Beatrix? We'll get into the other roles in a bit, but let's start first of part 2, key weakness of Beatrix. The biggest weakness of Beatrix is that she really does not want to play Purify as a battle spell to cleanse herself. Very similar to a lot of marksmen that don't really want to go for Purify. Reason for that is Flicker or Sprint offers Beatrix a lot of gap close and escape, and is much more ideal for a playstyle than Purify. Purify reduces the mobility of Beatrix by a lot because all that she has left is her dash, which makes her much easier to catch and even like chase down even under tower. It's not really that great of a dash that she has. The question is, why the heck would Beatrix use Purify since most marksmen might not use it, right? The short answer is because Beatrix has nothing to stop hard crowd controls and really bad mobility to get away from enemies that are chasing her. If you compare this to like other MMs in the game, other marksmen in the game who have innate CC cleanse like 1-1 or Hanabi's immunity as well when she has a shield, there are then those who have already like great mobility and don't really mind building Purify to begin with, like Irithel or Claude. These units here are of course much more resistant to hard crowd controls as well. Moskov, Melissa, Clint, even Leslie has some form of knockback on the enemy, stun to prevent some sort of aggression, while Sad Beatrix really has no utility at all to keep her alive other than her dash and battle spell, which is a key weakness. hard crowd control units basically force her to play Purify, or if she doesn't use Purify, then it does keep the Beatrix very much more passive than she would really like to be, especially if it was a Smurf trying to like dominate your games as well. Part number 3. EXP lane counters. Now, I want to go by lanes now in the final few sections. Depending on what role you're playing in, I want to teach you for every role how you can actually build to address the Beatrix very well. First of all, EXP lane counters are basically any units that offer high damage and stun that could possibly one-shot her in her full combo before she even gets to respond with like flicker and dash away. Some of them are Zilong, especially in the later parts of the game, can offer a lot of damage. Even if you proc her Wind of Nature, at least your marksman is now on a favorable matchup against Beatrix because Zilong helped pop the Wind of Nature as well. Hilda, Jawhead, or any other unit that really have a lot of burst before Beatrix gets the Wind of Nature is also really fantastic. Or also any unit that builds Petrify like Yuzong, Benedetta. All of these units threaten Beatrix as well in the early to mid game, especially before Wind of Nature. Poke EXP laners, on the other hand, like on the flip side, are a little bit harder to burst down the good Beatrix player and find it a lot trickier. Some units that are a bit more trickier to play against Beatrix is like Terizla, Xbox, Glue, Lapu Lapu, which might find it a bit trickier to actually lock down and control very well Beatrix players. Next one, let's talk about Majors. Out of all of the roles in the game, Majors are probably the best counter to marksmans or even Beatrix in this case consistently. The reason for that is other roles might be physical damage sometimes, might be magical damage sometimes. Beatrix can itemize in the Wind of Nature for a lot of the situations which help improve her survivability, and marksmans do not want to buy Athena Shield or Radiant Armor generally because it lowers their damage output by an insane amount. Units that can one burst her without time to react like Eudora, Nana, Kagura, Kadita, the list goes on really. There's so many Majors that are so well against her. But of course, poke Majors like Lilia, Novaria don't really address the Beatrix as much because Beatrix does have quite a bit of lifesteal if she wanted to go in that direction as well. Poke is not as fantastic as one-shot burst stun Majors too. Part 5, tanks. Your supports in the game, which sometimes don't always play the best ones, but these are some, if you are a support player, these are some angles that you can go. Tanks that force Beatrix to go Purify are those with extremely strong crowd controls, especially like Tigreal, like Atlas. These can be like really oppressive roams for Beatrix at all stages of the game, as she doesn't have much ways to prevent the tank from crowd controlling her if she isn't forced to like pick up Purify, which is fantastic, keeps her very passive as well in the backlines. Part 6, junglers. Assassin junglers with stun or power spike before Beatrix buys her Wind of Nature damage control for physical really address her very well. One of the major ones that controls her really well early to mid game is Saber, especially if you can get your timings correctly with this hero. But of course, Saber does fall off a little bit late game versus a lot of other games that Beatrix plays. As long as Beatrix survives to the late game, likely Saber will find it a little bit tougher later on. Nolan, Amon, and Zilong are all great options too. But really, the tricky part for assassin junglers is especially if towards the later part of the game, if they don't one-shot the Beatrix and they are in close range, as most of these assassin characters that we talked about tend to be after they complete their combo strings, Beatrix Whisker Shotgun can actually delete them from the game entirely and almost full heal her if she builds correctly, which is a issue with like big risks versus like big payoff gains in the assassin jungler role, which is why I think a lot of other roles should also play a part to address the Beatrix. Hope the tips help you gain some MMR, and check out the channel for more of such counter hero guides as well. Leave a comment on the hero that you struggle with against, and we might do that one next. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and see you in one of these 2 next videos.